Around that funding to quarterfinals AP. And spending along time with me are there's some ground rules. I will be timing the register speech. So you have to hear a bell at the appropriate times. At 10:15, we'll stop keeping track of the note of your features and you have to probably stop the features. And you should probably have your speeches and also your opponent's speeches in order to give up your eyes. Now, on the motion of this House support the new Formula One engine regulations calling upon Prime Minister.
第四，
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. So, Judge, for sports, for owners in general, one of the most expensive sports to operate around the world is F1. If around 600 to 700 million per year, then this is just a conservative estimate on average. Yet, so that people still invest in this sport. Why do they invest? Because this is the premium racing sport of the world. They always come to find the fastest automobile and the most competitive automobile industries from F1. So, but then we need to acknowledge F1 is headed to the trajectory of failure because of the lack of one simple thing: competition. So today, maybe you might know the top two drivers, and the top two drivers may be from the same constructor here. Or we also know the top two constructors, which may be Ferrari and McLaren. But we can't name like at least 10 of them because it's not simply not competitive enough. We only know the top few teams and the top few players. So this is because other teams can't actually compete. As we know, F1 is a money game. The team with the most money, the team with the most resources will be able to invest in their teams successfully to make sure their teams have the best edge and win their competitions. But simply not all teams can do this. As we know, there's 20 constructors there, but not all of them can compete. So this is why F1 has introduced new regulations to ensure that there is competition. As we know, the new regulation is state that 50% ICE and 50% ICE internal combustion and 50% battery power. This will reduce top speed, but this will increase the competitiveness of the competition. So this is two main reasons: increase competitiveness, which will be explained by me, and it will be save the environment, which will be explained by my DPM later. So now let me enter my arguments here. Competition. Look, we are aware there is a salary cap. Just like NBA, NFL, where the teams can't spend whatever they want, or there's a cap. But we need to know, this does not include the driver's salary, the executive salary, and the existing infrastructure in the F1 teams. So no matter what, legacy teams always have the advantage here. So they have the advantage of infrastructure, the advantage of teams, the advantage of engineers, the advantage of the best players here. So the thing is, it's not a level playing field. So this is what is why when we see the top two drivers will be from the same constructor in qualifying, and once we qualify, let's say the Monaco GP, once you're in the qualifying, once you're in pole position, there's literally no chance to overtake. Basically, if you qualify the top two, you basically get top two for the entire race. There is no overtaking. There's no sense of competition here. This actually just makes the competition very weak, very bland. This will actually make everyone just don't want to watch. And then I want to say here that the sport needs edge-to-edge competition. As we know, what is the main... Hold on a minute. We need edge-to-edge competition. Why? Because what we want to attract. We want to attract the audience to come to the stadiums, come to the race course, and actually look at our competitions. This is to make sure the sport does not die out. But if, let's say, we're going to just have a bland race where there's no overtaking, or there's very limited overtaking, because on average, there's only 4 overtakes per race nowadays. This is why F1 introduces regulations here. So, if I spent like $500 just to come for a race, I want to see some action. I want to see some chaos. I want to see some... but if I just come here for just a bland race, why did I spend $500? I might as well take a trip to the Maldives or something, right? So, this is why we want to make the races interesting, because in this race, we will make sure the straights, which are usually the most blandest part of all races, be competitive, where we can see overtakes, like you see in the F1 movie, where the underdogs actually come out and get first place after a long struggle. Everyone likes an underdog story, right? So, okay, I can take a point now.
So all teams relatively share the same power unit because Williams would buy a power unit from Mercedes. Other factors tip speed like aerodynamics and different designs. The big teams still have the budgets and the technicians to be able to do this. Why is this worth the trade-off of speed?
Well, as you know, the speed is a diminishing rate of return here. You can't find a difference between 400 kilometers per hour and 395 kilometers per hour. So the thing is, we are trying to make the teams more close to each other to make sure there's an overtakes it. So I don't get your logic here by saying, oh, we're going to reduce top speed slightly, going to affect the entire race. No, audience won't even give a damn about this. They won't even notice, but they will notice that overtakes happen more frequently and that the race will be more interesting. So now let me talk about some burden pushes that the opposition should have proven will try to prove to they want to prove that they have to defend the top speed is important. But I just explained just now. It's not. Audiences do not really care, do not really see the marginal difference of top speed here. Because, as you know, there is no. I mean, if you look at the regular eyes, there is no difference beyond 200-300 kilometers per hour. You can't even see it with your naked eyes. You know, human eyes have no sit down. We can't even see why we can't see the difference between the speed here. So I don't get why opposition here is going to defend why top speed is so damn important when everyone just really care. But the audiences, what really care is the chaos, the drama, and everything that's going to happen in the races. So this looks like, oh, I overtake. The last place is going to get first place. The second place, the person who started in pole might go the last place. This is the drama we're going to see. We're going to see the crashes. We're going to see all those stuff. This is what we call the art of sports. Because we know sports is a type of entertainment here.
Okay.
No, sit down. So that's why it's so damn important for us to recognize that sport is a form of entertainment, and that this is what keeps the drive alive, what keeps the F1 industry alive. And this is important because once audience members keep on coming to races, keep on investing in the merch, keep on coming back, scrolling through our TikTok, scrolling through everything, so basically keeping the F1 hype up, it's going to increase revenue overall for all teams, it's going to increase the influence, it's going to make the sport more sustainable in the end, and this all will lead to what? It will keep the investors coming in, it will continue to make the regulations of F1 safer, funnier, sustainable, and even better for all that is involved in this industry. And for all those reasons, I am proud to propose.
Three questions at the top of my speech. Firstly, it's just very unclear why the ICE is the flipping point of the competition. PM tells you that all the teams still have the best, like the best teams have the best engineers, the best drivers, the best kinds of aerodynamics, and so on. This is going to be symmetrical on both sides of the house. It is unclear why the ICE is the number one tipping point into making the competition fairer. Secondly, what does this diminishing of speed actually look like? Because Prime Minister tells you that it's only going to be a 5 kilometer per hour decrease. That's just simply not true. The diminishing of speed is actually perceivable. There are fans complaining, there are drivers complaining, there's a whole list of individuals complaining about what this diminishing of speed looks like. So it's not something that is just so small that you can ignore, but it's a very big decrease in speed that a lot of fans are complaining about. Prime Minister has to engage why that speed is worth losing in exchange for a lot of these overtakes that he tries to fight for. But then thirdly, is just what this overtaking actually looks like under their model. Because what it actually looks like isn't the smaller teams now somehow being able to beat teams like Mercedes. Pravin already tells you in his VOI that there are same engine units that still exist on both worlds. People still rely on the engine units made by Mercedes. They still rely on Red Bull. They still rely on all these engine units. They still have the same engineers. It is unclear why you suddenly have teams like Williams beating out Mercedes and winning the WTC. That's why you currently see Mercedes leading the competition still. It doesn't make any sense why they would somehow now be having more competition and people fighting for that top spot very unclear on why the ICE is just so unique to their side. First then, what is F1's biggest selling factor been throughout this, like throughout entire history, right? Because F1 has already sold itself as the pinnacle of F1 of motorsport and engineering. It isn't just your average other circuit race that people opt into. People know F1 for having the fastest cars, for having the best drivers, for having the hardest corners to drive around the track. This is what F1's selling point has always been. It's always about who has the fastest cars, like F1 just being much faster than any other competition that exists, like IndyCar, like NASCAR, and so on. But secondly, what is this buy-in, how does this relate to the buy-in of individuals that opt into F1? Because a lot of people that opt into F1 are fascinated by these kinds of machinery. They're fascinated by how the cars look. They're fascinated by how fast the cars can go, how fast they can turn, how fast they can brake. These are all the kinds of things that individuals like. They like to see how fast these cars can go. It hasn't always been about overtaking. It's usually about just this fine level of machinery that exists then. Secondly, just what do we defend on our side of the house? We think the likely counterfactual is just simple. We ought to opt into the older regulations. That is to say, we do not want the ICE. Then we would opt into having the power units to their fullest capability, able to get that top speed that we previously had. Before I move on, go.
Is our regulation going to make F1 slower than NASCAR?
Well, it's not going to make it 100% slower than NASCAR, but the problem is you're going to reduce a lot of that speed. That reduction in speed is problematic, especially when cars like even NASCAR are getting faster and other series are getting faster. People are improving the engineers. More engineers are moving into those sports. It shows that the competition is getting much faster, and the F1's unique selling point is slowly dying out. You don't see the fastest cars anymore. You don't see the best fine level of machinery. It is unclear why you have to throw this out just so that you can have more people buying into your competition, to liking competition as a whole. First argument then, why the vast majority of F1 viewers are watch F1 for the sole contingent fact that F1 is just really fast. Right now, after the regulations have passed, we've already told you there have been numerous complaints from not only the drivers itself, but viewers as a whole. People notice these kinds of differences. PM can't get away with just saying, it's just a 5 per hour decrease. When the vast majority of fans have been telling you, when they go to those kinds of places, when you go to those circuits, they've been telling you that the cars are ultimately slower, especially in tracks where they go flat out. That's very noticeable because those tracks where you have to go full speed now can't go to the same speed that they were previously being able to before. It's something that's very noticeable. That's the perception that they have. But secondly, just the initial preconceived perception that F1 has the fastest cars, capable of going 300 kilometers per hour. If you have a car that goes 300 kilometers per hour, that now goes 250 kilometers per hour, that sort of decrease just diminishes their perception. That makes them not really want to opt into F1, the very first reason why they opt into F1 in the first place. But secondly, just it's also just problematic, right? When you also extend these to drivers, because a lot of the main selling point of F1 is also just the drivers as a whole, right? You have Max Verstappen that is complaining to leave F1 because he ultimately feels that the cars are slower. And it's also problematic when we tell you that other kinds of racing motorsports are catching up. And even if you don't have this racing motorsport, we tell you that it's just much more problematic because people expect that speed, the thrill of that speed that you have when people go 300 kilometers per hour in Spa, when they go that fast in Sepang, even though Sepang is not here anymore, but those kinds of examples still exist then. I wanted to move on to why it's just regardless of all these kinds of regulations, why the competition is still roughly similar, right? Because we already tell you that the way in which these kinds of cars work isn't solely dependent on the ICE. You have, for example, the aerodynamics. You have, for example, the top 10, the best engineers working on your car. You have also certain regulations that you try to min-max in order to get your fastest car available. These are all the kinds of things that make the F1 team strong. You also have the best drivers. It's the same reason why you have Max Verstappen, who was practically driving a tractor last year, still being able to compete for the top 1 spot. That's why people still opt into F1 regardless. It doesn't have to be overtakes. People opt because they know that literally anything can happen. Even if McLaren is leading the race, people still root for Max Verstappen, even though those cars are inherently faster. that individual McLaren cars are inherently faster. What does this then mean? Government has to prove what is so important that you can throw all the way the speed that we previously had. They have to prove what is so important to have this kind of a buy-in then, and they also have to prove why it's so true that people would opt into having more overtakes or having more competition. They also have to prove why they get better competition as a whole, because we already tell you the same teams are going to get the top one position. There are so many factors that you have to put in mind. Even though you have much more overtakes, you still have Mercedes winning the current WDC. You still have McLaren that won the last season's championship. It's going to be symmetrical on both sides. You're not going to have, like, for example, Williams that's going to like suddenly pop up. And you also can see that the competition has also been much closer regardless of the ICE existing.
I find it funny that this team is going to die on the hill that speed is everything without recognizing that F1 is here today because every advancement in F1 throughout history always come at the cost of speed. When Ayrton Senna died in 1994, they made cars heavier. When Jules Bianchi died in 2014, they made cars heavier. They have made cars bigger. They have reduced speeds numerous times. Previously, you could refuel during races, so you could push your car to its limits because you know you can refuel. Now, because of an accident, no more refueling. So you have to manage the entire race with one tank, which means your average speed throughout the lap will drop. The best lap times for many races, all are 20, 30 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. So speed is not the barometer of why F1 is so great. I agree only to the extent that it is the fastest motorsport in the world. As long as we can tell you that there's no risk of that position being threatened, I think we win the debate. Because if you want to tell me that NASCAR is getting faster and F1 is losing 50 kilometers from here, the gap is still here, my friend. So I don't think any day we are going to be seeing NASCAR faster than F1 tomorrow. I don't think that's gonna happen. So I don't think that is a threat. That is why F1 is moving in this direction. They are willingly sacrificing power because it has been done before to make the races safer, to make the races better. In this case, this is not a safety issue. This is about making races better. First thing he tells you is that nothing will change. The gap that always exists will always exist. So might as well you push for speed. Then in the same breath, he tells you, look at what happened last year. Verstappen out of nowhere competed. First of all, it's inconsistent. Second of all, it just goes to show that that's not our goal. Our goal is not to make small teams become champions. Our goal is to make the races more entertaining. At the end of the day, even if Haas will continuously be last, they will overtake more on the straightaway. That's what gets fans into the stadiums. That's what we're fighting for. Before I continue, sure.
F1 change policy at the expense of safety. It is different with doing it for competitiveness. F1 itself has no incentive to take care of the audience, but they take care of the drivers. Don't trauma the case.
No, why would they care about the drivers? The drivers are not earning me anything. If I'm a driver and I tell my constructor, you know what? I understand the color of Ferrari is red, but I'm a guy who loves pink. And I'm the driver, you need to care about me. What do you think is gonna happen? What will your fans say? They will respond. Because the drivers get paid from these guys, but the fans are the ones who give these businessmen the money. I think fans are obviously the important stakeholder here. If you want to talk about drivers, sure. Every time a regulation changes, the first thing an athlete will do is to resist this change. Because they have practiced, trained in a certain way, do it this way. The moment the change happens, they'll be upset about it, but if they are great enough of an athlete, they will adapt. It has happened numerous times, not only in Formula One, but in every sport in the world. So to say that the drivers don't like it now is just, I think, a weak argument to say that the regulations should not be implemented. Now, last thing I want to talk about, what I want to conclude here is that it is about making the races more competitive. That's something that they do not engage with Jason about how the competitiveness is reducing, about how people don't want to go to races because it is boring, about how revenue is dropping. People watch Drive to Win, but that doesn't mean that revenue is increasing for F1 because a lot of these people are people who don't pay a lot of things to engage and enjoy what F1 gives them. They only need a next Netflix subscription. But you want to get people to come to races. You want to get people to continue investing in this business as a whole and burn 700 million USD a year and generate, don't know, God forsake how much profit. A lot of times it operates at losses. They're only going to do this if people come to the races. And people are only going to come to the races if things happen. And things can only happen in our world where you make more overtakes to happen. I think that generally that was clear, and I don't think there was any pushback from that beyond than just mitigatory things of nothing will change. And to answer that question of nothing will change, the gap will continuously increase, which leads me nicely into my next point, which is about sustainability and environment. So, worst case scenario on our side, even if nothing changes and all the races will be as it is today, which is what you are saying, at the very least, we have the environment. We make the races more sustainable. We make people who love the environment allowed to say, I like F1 too, because they're moving towards this direction, which I know sounds ludicrous, but we'll get into it a bit more. First, there are three layers in this. First is cost. At the end of the day, innovation in terms of how much you can maximize and make oil efficient is hitting its peak. That's number one. Number two, the continuous development into traditional power core units again has hit its peak to a certain extent. And lastly, the continuous development into traditional fuel is not working anymore because it's becoming more costly, especially as the climate continues where more people are relying on things like traditional fuel. So it's becoming harder and harder. This is going to be a way to offset that huge cost that will continue to increase. The initial R&D will be easily overcomable in the future when the gains improve. Second is buying. I think a lot of people must understand that F1 is a global sport. They operate in many different countries every year for every race. So there are many different governments with different value systems. Some governments don't give a shit about the environment at all. Some do. In the future, some may care a lot about the environment, and these are where races are happening. It may become very pertinent that one day people of this country don't want to support races that are extremely dangerous and pernicious to the environment, so they don't want races to be there. It will mean F1 will have to find substitutes, alternatives. That is another hassle that they have to think about, which is unnecessary. The more you push towards a direction that people are trending towards to, the more likely your sport will remain relevant. And right now the push is to be more environmentally conscious, especially in every type of sport. This is what is going to encourage F1 to maintain its global footing. I think that's extremely important to consider, especially since in the worst case, nothing will change. So all of these considerations are just a plus one benefit that is fine, all at the expense of speed, which happens year in, year out anyway. Speed is always the first to go when we're thinking about how to make the sport better. The last thing is just the environmental imprint. One day, this world is going to be like Dune. It's going to be a dystopia. And I think sports are going to go away. Like, it's going to be very difficult to survive where you're struggling to find food and still have time to watch basketball. But we are going to push it to the limits. We are going to make sure F1 is one of the last sports to go, because that's our stakeholder. We want it to exist for as long as possible. And in our world, it's going to exist as long as possible because the environmental imprint is going to be much, much lesser compared to theirs. And that's all the things they have to contend with. And they cannot run away by saying, but we have speed though. Thank you.
Okay, position here.
Let's deal with Ram's push that says that every single time we have any issue in F1, the alternative was always to increase weight and reduce speed. There's a difference with what happens in this debate. F1 obviously doesn't want drivers dying because that's counterproductive for your sport. That's why the specific trade-off is worth it and we make certain reductions. But even if you notice, speed is always the last option that you choose to reduce. We introduced the halo, we introduced different security systems, we made driver suits more fireproof to prevent oil from flaming you up. There were countless amounts of mechanisms that we exercised in the event of safety, which was the most severe possible negative outcome for F1 that we did before we compromised speed. Because you must understand that this team is extremely insensitive to Kai's frame. Kai tells you that F1 is marketed as the pinnacle of motorsport, marketed on the idea of speed. So when someone wants to watch a racing series, they obviously understand that all racing series are competitive to some degree. But the tipping point as to why you oftentimes pick F1 is the fact that you know F1 is extremely fast and historically has been the fastest car as a whole. Ram says NASCAR will never get close, but it's not even about the idea of NASCAR catching up. One, NASCAR is actually getting faster and other series are actually getting faster. We think if Ram's metric is true, that at every single instance we want to secure something, we are willing to trade off speed. It is unclear as to why this trajectory wouldn't continue to such extent. But then the point I want to explain here is Jason lies when he tells you that people don't notice the speed. One, it's a 50-50 reduction from an 80-20. 30% of your horsepower in your damn engine is going down. This is not a marginal change. I watched this season compared to last season. My God, the Red Bull is a shit box this season. If you really watch the races, there is a huge reduction in speed that you can obviously notice. Because when you're watching it or when you're at the place, when the car goes past you, you feel a huge boom, but now it's like boom. And there's obviously a difference. If there is no bloody difference, the delta in the debate cannot happen. Because this team also asserts to you that there's a huge issue with overtaking. The first thing I'll do in this debate is just to explain why overtaking actually happened under the old regulations to quite a reasonable degree and why their margin of overtaking that they get isn't particularly meaningful in the round. One, driver skill matter. This means there are the 20 best drivers in the world racing on different tracks. Some tracks or some drivers are better on street circuits like Jeddah. Some drivers are better on race circuits like Monza in Italy. This means that most of the time, the reasons why you see in F1 like Nico Hulkenberg winning last year, even though he raced in an ultimate shitbox, was because different cars are designed to adapt to different tracks. Because individual teams are given agency to be able to design their car in terms of aerodynamics, how much height you want to put on your car, and etc. The problem here is that this team is uncomparative when they explain that the power unit is the tipping point. My POI explains that there are three distributors of power units in F1. The big teams sell the same power units that they develop to the smaller teams. So that means everybody is to some extent rocking the same power unit. If everybody is rocking the same power unit, what then is the difference between why some teams beat other teams? The difference is in the way you design your car, the aerodynamics you use, the height you raise your car at which, the skill of your drivers. There's a billion variables as to why overtaking happens specifically. It is extremely unclear as to why the nuance they get because you're able to drain a battery pack changes this. Even then, under our comparative, before the old regulations, we had the drag reduction system in F1, where it was a mechanical thing where your reverse wing opened that gave you extra wing flow and better aerodynamics that allowed your car to move faster. It is unclear as to why teams couldn't just exercise that right and why we need a specific engineered battery deployment in order to be able to shift this. What does this prove in the debate? One, it proves that the margins of overtaking that they get are relatively unclear. Maybe it is true that we have to concede on op that they do get some level of more overtaking because maybe you can deploy the battery at specific moments to get some level of overtaking. One, it doesn't prove the burden they put in first because the bigger teams will always have the ability to blaze past you or breeze past you anyway on just pure top speed and aerodynamics. That means the first half of their case is dead. Ram pivots this case very interestingly when he tells you it's not about beating the bigger teams like Jason says, it's about creating more competition internally at the bottom. One, we already explained why there's many variables that can prove this. Driver skill, because most of these teams in the medium to lower brackets are relatively around the same levels, working on the same levels of budget and have similar levels of engineering. When this team tells you that different people are not winning in F1, it's not because there's no overtakes happening at the bottom. It's because people are only focused at the top. Because if you only see Max Verstappen win every year, then of course Max Verstappen going to win every year. But we see changes last year. Lando Norris won. We had races where Max crashed. We had different alternatives. But the problem is they don't prove why Max doesn't win under their comparative. If Max has the best engineers to design the best car, even if everyone gets the same power unit, Max is still going to win. And if Max is the best driver, Max is still going to win because he's going to know how to deploy the battery better under their side as well. Why then? The next thing I want to deal with is this environment push. Because Ram says we must trade off speed to protect the environment. What? We do this all the time already. We have more sustainable fuel. We have different forms of aerodynamics. We change the parts that cars can use to make my materials more accessible. The other side wants to put a 50% lithium battery into the car and say they're saving the environment. Have you heard about lithium harvesting in the Congo and what's happening when China are doing things? And I bet you these fellas are sourcing it from China because half of these F1 fellas are corrupt fucks anyways. Oh shit. But yeah, the point I'm trying to make is, and it's really unclear as to what scale of environmental change they need. Why does it need to come at the compromise of speed? At the end of this interaction, maybe they do get some marginal levels of extra overtaking. We prove that maybe you get 2 overtakes extra in the race. What then tips this debate? One, the loss in speed that is experienced. Because remember guys, people watched F1 before the regulations were changed. Drivers drove in F1 before the regulations were changed. That means you have a preconceived expectation of how the car is supposed to feel and supposed to sound and supposed to move. The point in which you actively can notice this change or this feeling change when you watch these sports, or the signaling effect of knowing that the cars are slower already, is a big form of deterrence for you. What does this mean? This means that the unique selling point of F1 no longer becomes the fact that it's the fastest. NASCAR has more crashes. NASCAR has more explosions. I would argue cars are less safe and more entertaining because they blow up more in NASCAR. Now, the problem here is that you go band for band with other car series on just pure competitiveness and drive. The issue then becomes that if people want to see overtaking and cars exploding more, people have many other series that they can watch. People can watch different things like MotoGP where Nico Rossi goes flying all the time. The tipping point then is that we must preserve the unique selling factor that exists within Formula 1, and that is speed. We prove alternatives as to why we can ensure that overtaking can happen. We don't think this team justifies why it needs to come at the compromise of your top speed, why it needs to come at the compromise of your power unit. But lastly, just very quickly, drivers have been complaining also a lot. Ram says they will just listen. But no, if people don't perceive the inherent value of Formula 1, because you can't feel the value of jumping into a faster car, people are probably going to opt into NASCAR where they have more fun anyways.
I think it's a bit fitting or ironic that our case centers around competition, because I think in every exchange, opposition has not been able to overtake us, and I don't think they will in whip either. This has been something that's been a walkthrough from the start then. So I think there's 2 explicit problems I want to call out from side opposition here. One, it's just the concept that for some reason regulations put people off in terms of drivers and people watching. Pravin said that, oh, people started watching F1 before regulations, so now when you implement these things, they'll suddenly stop watching. Like, I'm pretty sure there are F1 fans who are older than at least 30 years old, which means that probably they've been there before the previous regulations that have happened, which Ram mentioned also decreased speed, which also made things more safe and less interesting or whatever, but these people still stayed and watched, and more fans in fact grew because now the fact that F1 is an advancing sport because of these same advancements and these trade-offs that they did in terms of speed, because F1 understands that speed is not the be-all and end-all, insofar that they can still be the pinnacle of sport and can still be faster than literally every other motorsport. They are willing to take this trade-off because of the fact they understand that they are still the primary drive, like race thing in general, and the people always watch them because of these sorts of things then. Secondly then, is in terms of the other policies and what changes, because they want to push the biggest harm onto us is that, oh, nothing changes, it's just as competitive. Okay, if that is true and that is the biggest harm you want to push onto us, then you don't explain as to why this then outweighs the fact that we have the environmental changes that also happen here, and as to how the dynamics of races changes to at least make the races as they happen more interesting. Even if it's the same people winning all the time, I'm sure even in football, you would rather watch a 4-3 match than a 1-0 match, simply because more goals and more interesting things are happening. This is the delta that happens. Even if the same people are winning, it is the manner in which they win, and it's the manner in which the races happen that actually pull people to want to watch this. Otherwise, I'll just watch the highlights and just watch when they start and then just watch when they've crossed the finish line, and that's the only thing I'll do. It is the fact that races become far more interesting on our side that people actually opt into this in the first place. That was what you had to contend with. It's too late for you to do so in op-ed then. So there's 2 clashes here I want to talk about then. One, it's in terms of the quality of F1 in general. So why then does this change, or why is this
okay, what does opposition say as to why they get quality? They base the entire point of the quality of the F1 on speed. Because it's the fastest car, the fastest whatever, people are watching. I think we've already disproven as to why. One, this does not diminish it to the point where it becomes unwatchable because it is still these cars are still fast. They say the thing about the fact that it's losing 30% of its horsepower because you're going from 80 to 50, like, you're not removing 30% of the engine. The 30% is replaced by a different type of engine that obviously has horsepower. And in fact, electric engines have high horsepower, which is why in status quo right now, they have higher road tax than like normal cars. So the fact that you're just losing 30% of your engine isn't true, and it's a straw man at best. You don't explain as to why the change of it is more than marginal. Obviously, if you're like some super fan who looks at all the times, you're likely to notice some form of difference. But insofar as you're someone sitting there and then you just see like a blur go past you and then go past you 100 more times, you're not actually going to be able to ascertain the specific difference of this 30% change. Secondly, then, you don't prove as to why this is something that's even that important, because as we explained to you down the line, multiple times regulations have reduced speed. Sure, that one was for a different reason as to safety, but just because that was for a different reason, and this one is also a valid reason in terms of making it more competitive and making it more environmentally friendly, you don't explain as to why just because it's a different reason suddenly means it's an invalid take that the F1 doesn't want to do or shouldn't want to do. And clearly they want to do it because the regulation is going in now. You're arguing against the regulation. So clearly the F1 board or whoever's in charge have already deemed this as a worthy trade-off in order to introduce the specific aspects that we want to defend here. But secondly then, again, you don't explain as to why speed is what makes people come in, because none of the races that you watch, and you're like younger than me, so clearly you haven't watched the races from before that, are as fast as the people in the 90s or in the early 2000s, and you still want to watch it because it is the fastest sport comparative to everything else. You don't explain as to why it has to be the fastest speed and keep going faster when you are already accepting the races now as being amazing. Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen, glazing, these people are slower than the ones before. You don't explain as to why that's any different then. Secondly then, as to why you talk about drivers who will suddenly put up in arms and don't want to race. Like, so what? Who is quitting? Lewis Hamilton is the one that you cite as to the big racer that doesn't like this thing. You honestly think he's going to quit and go to NASCAR? Like, drivers will complain and then they will adapt. The same way that footballers complain when you introduce VAR and when you change the kickoff mechanics. But what they did was they adapted because they are a footballer. Like, literally, where else can they go? This is a race car driver. Like, it's a different dynamic than NASCAR, and NASCAR is a bit shittier, no offense. Who is going to move there? But secondly then, they are paid to adapt to these sorts of things. That's what racers do. That's what athletes do. You don't explain as why the mental calculus of literally the biggest racers on the planet who are still going to win suddenly don't want to do it just because they can't win in the way they wanted to, even though they can literally train to just do it differently then.
Yes. So it's really unclear why you're lying that cars last time were significantly faster. I would think a car with 200 horsepower based on the technological limitations they had back then would be much slower than the modern day cars that we have, that we also have better engines for, that can clearly move faster. Stop lying.
I can't believe the moon is made of cheese, but if you look at the literal statistics of the stop speeds, it literally comes from the 90s or early 2000s. And the logic that we run through is also quite simple. It's the fact that they made cars heavier to make them safer. It's the fact that they changed the mechanics of how you're able to drive then. The fact that you cannot refuel now, which means that even if you have the fastest car, you can somehow make it light and make them do these things. It's because of the fact now that you fundamentally change how races function, which makes these things slower and makes people just drive safer because they value those sorts of things then. And we explained to you as to how this is just merely an extension of that, and it's something that still people are able to get over because they've gotten over literally every other regulation that came before it. We explained to you that the main point of this is in terms of competition and why this makes it far better. Even if it doesn't make the lowest team there win, it makes the races far more interesting when these lower teams have the chance of winning and when they keep overtaking and fans are on their seat wondering, will this guy finish in front of him? Will they finally change? Because as it happens now, like the guy who finishes, like who wins some stupid pre-tournament, starts in front and then he stays in front until the whole race. Maybe there's one or two exchanges just between the top two guys. You don't explain then as to how these likely things happen. The only examples they give of people from like who aren't like the usual suspects winning, like one once and one because like three fellas crashed in front of them and it drove in the rain. You don't explain as to how your model is one that actively gets people to buy in. I only knew about that also because Ram told me there's no incentive for me to want to watch these races because I think the same people are going to win anyway then. So in terms of the quality of racing, explain to you why competition happens, at least practically in terms of more teams are likely to win, but even if not, optically fans just view races as more interesting, and that's what gets people buying the seats. Otherwise I'll probably just watch some highlights on YouTube. You do not contend with this aspect then. Secondly then, in terms of the environment, and this is something where we completely walk over because you don't want to contend with it at all. You say there's other things like fuel and all that. So we can do more for the environment. You don't explain as to why we have to stop these things, especially when your biggest harm is that nothing else changes. Why not just take this +1 in terms of the environment? But secondly to you, we explain to you, and Ram explains to you as to why we've reached the apex of the saturated the other forms of development. Because insofar that we still want to develop on the conventional combustion system, like that's obsolete. The amount of R&D that's going there has reached a peak point where we cannot advance further simply because one, we've exhausted all sorts of research. But secondly then, because the world and technology around it is trending towards different places. People do not want to invest in combustion energy engine sorts of things unless you're only specifically from F1. Other things such as green technology and sustainable environments and sustainable policies are the things in which the worlds are trending to. So it's just far more cost effective for you to latch onto these sorts of developments to do these things then. But secondly then in terms of optics, people are more likely to buy in because people suddenly have a conscience and want to be more environmentally friendly. So you obviously then also care about this when you're watching your sports and you want to opt in and at least spend money within your sports in the first place then. But secondly then in terms of countries buy-ins, because like you can't race in Abu Dhabi forever, like you need other countries to also be able to want to host you and all these sorts of things. And a lot of the countries in the world are trending towards more sustainable and green stuff, which means then that it runs at the risk, if your sport is one that is obsolete and one that is not environmentally friendly, you can be pushed out from these countries and never race there again. For all those reasons, proud to propose it.
Starting my pitch in 3, 2, 1. There are two questions I want to answer in my speech. The first is, do F1 become more competitive and whether the competitiveness is important towards F1 sports? The second question that I want to answer in this debate is, do new power unit make environmental better? And I will argue that why this is largely non-contentious in this debate, and also it is symmetric. Even that it is contentious, this is largely symmetric under both sides of the house. Let me answer my first question. Do these new power unit make sports F1 more competitive? The first thing that I want to note on top of my speech is that the first claim that made by this government on top of their PM speech is that legacy teams always have the advantage, i.e. they will have the best driver, they will have the best resources. The first question that I want to make on top of this is that if teams have difference in power dynamics in terms of drivers, if teams have different power dynamics in terms of resources, domination of top teams is just largely symmetric under both sides of the house, because if your Ferrari can dominate 10 years before with their resources, they can also dominate 10 years after in the status quo. I will argue that since all the ability of the all power units is limited, their capacity are largely the same. The delta of this then becomes is the resources in drivers and the technicians and also technology. This is largely not mitigated by this government team. I'm unsure how they're able to win on this clash. Judge, at the end of this, the conclusion is simple. Team with more resources will still dominate the game. Their argument, the analytically fire of their arguments failed. There's no overtake under their side of the house because teams are still strong. The teams that can still go 200 km might decrease to 150 km, but the team under their side of the house that is not that good, maybe 100 km, will just reduce to 50 km. I'm unsure that why suddenly this makes them better. The second thing that I answer is why overtake still happens inside of opposition. Even judge, if you evaluate overtake that much that contributes towards the competitiveness of the competition, we will explain to you why we will still symmetrically get overtake under our side of the house. Well, we might do a small trade-off that they will get more overtake, but we suggest that the increase in amount of the overtake is not that significant, and we will argue that it's largely marginal. Why this is true? Because the alternative that Pravin has really posited to you largely mitigate this. Pravin explained that we have counterfactual able to deal with this. I.e., you will have different tracks on the circuit. Maybe some driver is really good in Monza. Maybe some driver is really good in Red Bull Ring. These are the instances where we're able to see different driver winning the races, not only on top of the game, but also on the bottom of the leg. You can see Nico Hülkenberg getting third prizes when he's driving a tractor with a kick Sauber car. It's insane, man. You can see drivers like Alex Albon suddenly become top 10, top 5. This is insane, man. Guys, these are the cases where we can see the driver are actually different in different tracks. This also proves Pravin's argument on why driver skills is also inherently important in this debate. Because driver skills also directly constitute the competitiveness of the tournament. This does not engage by this government team. They already failed on this claim. Ram, sit down first. The second thing I want to explain, okay, so basically we mitigated the claim, the hub of this GAF claim teams, Gulf team claims that we don't have competitiveness, right? But thirdly, I want to explain why speed does matters. This Gulf team pushback is simple. They simply just say that speed does not matter because there's much more things to care about, i.e. safety, i.e. environmental. POI from me is simple. I'm suggest that the team itself will sacrifice speed because of the safety of the driver, because this is the asset of the team, because fans care about driver, the team have the incentive to do so. But teams have no incentive to reduce the speed because of the team have no incentive to reduce of the speed because of the competitiveness, because they want to make it more enjoying the game. Because the reason of why people watch F1, they want to enjoy the top of the speeds. This is an exclusive benefit and also exclusive experience. You can only get it under F1, right? Mio says that speed goes slower, but people still watch. This is untrue. Prop claim that previously is much more faster in the whatever 2000 era. This is just factually untrue. Judge, if you want to just simply gut check this fact, right? After 20 years, you got technological advancement. Look at the shape of the car 20 years ago and the shape of the car in the status quo. It's completely different. This is the technological advancement. We are able to make the car better because we have followed the latest technology or the aerodynamic technology that we don't used to have 20 years ago. We got DRS last year. It's insane. We are cutting cars between lanes. Cars is overriding each other, overtaking. Unlike Mio said that we cannot overtake them. These are all the facts. If you're willing to gut check yourself, car is getting better. People watch F1 because cars just gradually get better, and also this is why people choose to watch F1, but not Nasdaq. Nasdaq is slow. F1 is relatively faster. The second thing I want to say is that people can accept F1 too slow to protect driver. This is important asset for teams. This is why they have incentive. But drivers, they cannot accept the fact that but teams cannot accept the fact that they want to make the car slower significantly just because the growth of environment. Because they first have to explain that why people care about environment, right? Because F1 fans, relatively large amount of them, or people in the status quo, are just like Rob who use plastic fork and spoon every day. They don't care about environment. I'm unsure why this suddenly become a tipping point of debate that people suddenly just care about environment. If you are using non-environmental friendly fuel, I'm not watching F1 anymore. This is an assertive claim under their side of the house they have to address in reply, but it's still too late. That's what Mio said. The second question I want to answer this debate is, do new power unit make environmental better? And note, Judge, this is a huge backloading of case from Lam's speech that never get identified in Jason's speech. This is just weird, right? Note, Judge, this opposition team is inconsistent with their claim because Jason said that legacy team is dominating. They implement this regulation, simply make it faster and fair and square. Bottom teams can able to win sometimes. Ram say, actually this debate is about environment. This is a huge pivot, man. But before that, go.
I did not claim that cars will fast. I say they will make it more competitive and accelerate fast.
Hey, make it more competitive, not faster. What is this argument? They engage with their best case, right? Why is this factually untrue? Why new power unit does not make environment better? Ram says that they will make F1 more sustainable, but as so far there's no mechanization, Judge, you cannot buy this claim. Second, in status quo, we already have it in status quo. We have sustainable fuel, we have sustainable material. I'm unsure why F1 is not sustainable under our side of the house. Thirdly, by comparative, what are they using under their side of the house? Guys, they are using lithium battery. Lithium battery is non-degradable. And guess what? You need to ensure your team have top performance. You need to use new lithium battery every round in every different places because you know the iPhone battery health, right? They want to ensure their battery on the top of the battery health so that they can more sustainable. Because this is what win them the game, right? They have to exchange lithium battery every round and every track. This just makes them produce more lithium battery, change more lithium battery. This is far more not sustainable under their side of the house. Do not let them get away from this. Worst case, Judge, even if this is true, they have to prove that why this is worth it for F1 to trade off the speed of our environment, because this is the reason why people watch F1. Lastly, speed is important for F1 because of the investment. The way here is simple. This is bad for the development of F1. No one watch F1 if speed is slow.
Let's start by drawing the margins in this debate. This team asserts to you that F1 previously was not competitive, their mechanism to prove it was that top teams and Max Verstappen win all the time. But they also say they want to explain why competition between the middle to lower teams increases. They have no mechanism as to why the competition here, or no explanation to why the competition here was already insufficient. This means that at best, you ought to ask a question as to what is the scale of limited overtaking or amount of overtaking that they're able to attain. Why was our frame and trade-off much more charitable in the round? We told you few reasons. One, F1 races and competition, particularly in the middle to lower areas, are extremely contingent on factors like track, the fact that teams work on similar budgets and how you prepare for the race, driver training, things like aerodynamics and etc. are all factors that oftentimes make competition in the middle to lower areas of the races extremely tight, or to have some level of competition already and reasonable overtaking. We will agree that it is obviously true that under their side, they have to get the benefit of more overtaking. And we agreed to this on op. But the question you needed to ask was, what was the margins of overtaking that they get in comparison to us, as opposed to the reductions of speed that they want to trade off? If you look at the way this engagement happens, this team is extremely stubborn because they refuse to acknowledge the harm of trading off 30% of your horsepower. Mio says it's a different engine, but no, it's the composition of the engine. So it means 30% goes into this extra nitro booster that allows you to boost in certain parts. That means you have to take away components from your engine, your valves, your piping systems that power the car as a whole. That is the difference. So it is actually a 30% reduction. The info slide says you must trade off speed. They can't assert this. This team refuses to engage on a case as to why that specific speed trade-off is worth it. At best, we get this from Ram. Thank you, Ram, who explains that historically F1 has already traded off speed in a multiplicity of instances. This is assertive because they tell you speeds were faster back then, they drop a bunch of names. We gut check this with intuition. We tell you it is probably true that technological advancement would make cars faster. We think there were some trade-offs in speed for metrics like safety. We think Ram is absolutely correct there, but we don't think the goal of F1 is inherently to not prioritize speed if they market themselves as speed. The incentive structure is always the one to make a faster car, but you want your faster car to also be a safe car. So logically, just like how planes have gotten faster over the years, cars are also likely to get faster over the years. That is why, on the margins, this team has an extremely limited margin to work on as to what the margins in overtaking are going to look like. Let's engage with the second half of this debate, which is how consumers are likely to react. They say consumers don't care about a big drop in speed, and they say in their side, if consumers see some levels of overtaking, this is good. We agree, probably more levels of overtaking is valuable for a consumer, but you must nuance this to the nature of what F1 looks like. We agree that maybe NASCAR will not overtake F1, but we agree that the margins get a lot closer in terms of top speed, which means in the calculus of the average individual, like we told you down the bench, top speed oftentimes becomes a diminishing factor in why they choose to stick to a particular series. When series like NASCAR have different variables, like racing on dirt tracks, like racing on different tracks, more crashes, more explosions, lesser roll cages, and lesser security mechanisms, these factors start to amplify in the calculus and consideration of the average individual. That's why we tip this debate, because we answer to you that the average individual, even in their best case where you don't notice the speed changes, oftentimes opt into F1 because you believe you're watching the fastest car. And maybe the fact that you probably already noticed this shift or difference because the large bulk of F1 people were around for the regulation changes already means that the value of speed becomes a diminishing thing for you as a whole that affects your judgment and calculus. If Diptin wants to say that people care about overtaking, it is unclear as to why a regulation change on that. If people care about overtaking and competition more, it is really unclear as to why that doesn't become the overriding calculus of an individual. Because there's many other series in the world that have significantly more amounts of overtaking. Cars overtake each other way more in NASCAR. So what we prove under the side of opposition is that you shift the calculus and you reduce the unique selling point that F1 has. Which means under their side, if people inherently see the signaling effect of regulation change as valuing competition more, people are more likely to opt into other series as opposed to this. We win the debate because we simply give you the most charitable reasons as to how things play out within the
government reply.
I just want to say, if you do win the round, which may happen, it's not going to be because of charity, it's because you are a buffalo. Okay, that's all I just wanted to say that. I think, first things first, I think it's very important to ask the question, why F1 institutes regulations? They make it seem as if the only time speed has been compromised is in instances of safety. No, F1 make regulations not for one consideration, it's for the future of the sport. When they did it, when Bianchi died, it's because that's what they needed to address. They're doing this now because this is what they need to address. And the compromise is speed, which is always the first thing to go because that's not important. It is not advertised anywhere that this year the cars are faster than ever. That has never been the tagline of F1. And it has always been about making the races more interesting. In which world does that happen? They tell you that they are happy to rely on everything that has happened in the past, which is clearly not working because right now the races are not interesting. So the DRS system, the previous systems that have existed to encourage competition cannot be overcome because of the same gaps we all agree with. Domination by the best teams. They seem to tell you as if because we are the ones who are actually told you that, but they seem to make it seem as if it's a silver bullet against us. No, we are telling you that right now, in this circumstance, when Max Verstappen is going at top speed on the straightaway, someone from behind who has a fully charged battery will overtake him, and him in his great car can do nothing about it. That's what I want to see because I fucking hate Max Verstappen. It's what people want to watch. And the only way to do that is to have this policy, is to institute this regulation, is to make these people come. You are telling me that one day when people don't watch, all these people who love top speed, are you going to tell all these investors who want to pull out one day, don't worry, I will spend $3,000 on tickets because I want to see cars go as fast as rockets. That's the reason? Likely. More people are going to lose out on these investments because of the fact that nobody is watching this sport, because nobody can afford these tickets as it continuously gets more expensive. So I think at the end of the day, the question of why people watch F1 is multi-layered. But generally speaking, more excitement means more interest. More interest means more people. That's all the simple claim that we are making. You want to fight for this extremely unique group of people that we are not even sure exists. Speed, 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 speed. Numbers memorized in their heads. And even if they do, that should not be alive. See, it's your life. That you only know this about this particular sport. It's so much bigger than that. The history of Schumacher, Ayrton Senna have nothing to do with the fact that they were the fastest, but everything else with how the fact that they were excellent racers. So it has nothing to do with top speed. So I think clearly we win on this issue. We win on this issue, I think we take the debate. Second thing and more important thing is, where will F1 survive longer? It is in our world where we mechanize. This is an expensive investment. There's a current drop in revenue because people are not going. And F1 as it stands is going against every trend in the world, not only in terms of the environment, but in every types of things, in various things like social issues, capitalism, nonsense. It is in our world where instituting this regulation addresses all of these issues. More people will want to invest because of the fact that it's going towards the trends. More people will want to stay in these investments because they recognize this can still be a profitable investment and I'm not operating on a loss when I spend close to $1 billion a year funding a team that will finish dead last. Because at the very least, people will buy my merchandise because they know the names of the drivers, because they are constantly shooting up on the races because overtakes are happening frequently. These are all the things that we get in our world, and the only thing we're losing is speed. They tell you that speed has never been compromised. Gut check this by saying years of technological development. Surely the cars must be fastest just like the planes. All of you do a Google check right now. The fastest commercial aeroplane was in 1970. If it is 2026, then you check your gut and you tell me which you'd rather rely on. What? God, when you make me a call, faster. I know you got it. My colleague is the only so high. Why did you get that? I can try it now. You can tell them to take a stop. Just stop, right? Okay. Yeah, thank you. Yo, why did you clock everything really from? No idea. What? People listen to me. Sao đọc đồng à? Lại đi bên này mình có một địa đâu để không đi. Đó, đấy là cái chuyện.
Yeah, they will be too emotional.